The banks had interests in so many of these monopolies as to create an interlocking network of powerful corporation directors, each of whom sat on the boards of many other corporations, according to a Senate report of the earlier 20th century. Morgan, at his peak, sat on the board of 48 corporations, Rockefeller 37 corporations. Meanwhile, the government of the US was behaving almost exactly as Karl Marx described a capitalist state, pretending neutrality to maintain order, but serving the interests of the rich. Not that the rich agreed among themselves, they had disputes over policies, but the purpose of the state was to settle upper-class disputes peacefully, control lower-class rebellion, and adopt policies that would further the long-range stability of the system. The arrangement between Democrats and Republicans to elect Rutherford Hayes in 1877 would set the tone. Whether Democrats or Republicans won, national policy would not change in any important way. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, despite its look of somber, black-robed fairness, was doing its bit for the ruling elite. How could it be independent, with its members chosen by the president and ratified by the Senate? How could it be neutral between rich and poor when its members were often former wealthy lawyers and almost always came from the upper class? In 1895, the court interpreted the Sherman Act so as to make it harmless. It said a monopoly of sugar refining was a monopoly in manufacturing, not commerce, and so could not be regulated by Congress through the Sherman Act. The court also said the Sherman Act could be used against interstate strikes because they were in restraint of trade. It also declared unconstitutional a small attempt by Congress to tax high incomes at a higher rate. And that case was Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. In later years, it would refuse to break up the Standard Oil Company and the American tobacco monopolies by saying that the Sherman Act barred only unreasonable combinations in the restraint of trade. I think you can see here, basically, the Supreme Court was making it so that laws were ruled on that made it easier for people who are doing business to make more money and for corporate leaders to be protected. By 1866, the Supreme Court did away with 230 state laws that had been passed to regulate corporations. By this time, the Supreme Court had accepted the argument that corporations were persons and their money was property protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Supposedly, the amendment had been passed to protect Negro rights, but of the 14th Amendment cases brought before the Supreme Court between 1890 and 1910, 19 dealt with the Negro. 288 dealt with corporations. The power of illusion. Oh yeah, we're gonna make this amendment. It's gonna be about this, but really it's just like a path in for us to actually rule on behalf of rich people. Crazy.